What if I told you that a flat earther, someone who genuinely believes the earth is shaped like a giant dinner plate, actually has a worldview that is 100% flawlessly logical?
I mean, most people listening to this would probably say you've lost your mind, or that you just don't know the definition of the word logical.
Right. Which is the completely normal reaction. We look at someone who thinks, like, circumnavigating the globe is just sailing in a giant circle around the rim of a disk, and we immediately want to throw a textbook at them.
Oh, absolutely.
We want to say, look at the satellite photos, look at the curvature of the horizon. You are factually wrong. But here's the wild secret about the bedrock of human reasoning. Being factually wrong does not mean you are logically wrong.
It is a massive distinction. We conflate those two concepts constantly in everyday life. We treat logic as a synonym for truth or, a synonym for common sense.
Yeah.
But when you actually look under the hood of how arguments work, logic is an entirely different kind of machinery.
And that machinery is exactly what we're firing up for you today. Welcome to this deep dive. If you're the kind of person who finds yourself just exhausted by sloppy debates, or you want to understand how to strip an argument down to its studs and test if it actually holds weight, you are in the perfect place.
We're going to be looking at a foundational text simply titled Logic by Wilfred Hodges. And Hodges is just a master at taking the absolute mess of human communication, all our weird grammar, our half-truths, and showing us how to apply strict, unemotional rules to it.
He basically gives us a system to map the invisible architecture of thought. But to build that map, we have to start by completely redefining our terms, right?
Yeah, we have to figure out what logicians actually care about.
Because, as we established with the flat earther, they clearly don't care about objective reality.
They really don't. The fundamental target of logic isn't truth, and it isn't being smart, and it certainly isn't about being fair or just. Logic is strictly the study of consistent sets of beliefs.
Let's hover on that word for a second. Consistency. It feels like, I don't know, a much lower bar than truth.
In a way, it is. Consistency simply asks one question: could this specific set of beliefs all be true together in some possible situation? That's the entire test.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with loyalty or justice or whether the situation reflects our actual universe.
I always think of it like the lore of a sprawling fantasy video game or like a sci-fi universe. In our reality, magic spells don't exist, right? Faster than light warp drives don't exist.
Sure.
But if a video game establishes a rule that casting a fireball requires 50 points of mana, and then a character with 0 mana casts a fireball anyway, the game's code crashes. It's a glitch. It violates its own internal rules.
That's a phenomenal way to visualize it.
As long as the fictional universe follows its own internal rules without contradicting itself, it is completely logical, even if it is completely detached from the real world.
Exactly. Logic is basically the physics engine of a video game. It doesn't care what assets you load into the game, dragons, spaceships, flat earths. It only cares that the collision detection works and the gravity equations don't contradict each other.
Right.
Let's look at how Hodges strips away our everyday judgments using this exact framework. Imagine a man who supports Arsenal Football Club on Tuesday and then violently cheers for their rival Spurs on Wednesday.
People would call him fickle, like a terrible fan.
But is he illogical? No. There is no logical contradiction in changing your mind or liking two opposing things at different times. Or take a legal system that makes divorce incredibly easy and cheap for billionaires, but agonizingly slow and humiliating for the working class.
I mean, that is deeply unjust. It's infuriating.
Right. It violates our sense of fairness. But a system can be perfectly consistent while being completely evil. Or imagine a mother who slaps her child across the face for telling a lie, and then 5 minutes later lies on the phone to her boss to get out of work.
She's a hypocrite. Two-faced.
But technically, strictly speaking, her actions are logically consistent. A person can hold the belief children should not lie, and the belief adults can lie to their bosses simultaneously without the universe imploding. Hodges forces us to separate our moral outrage from the strict mechanics of consistency.
Which brings us back to the flat earther, the belief that the Earth is a flat disk, and the belief that sailing east for long enough will bring you back to your starting point. Wait, sorry, those two beliefs can exist together in a hypothetical universe.
Yes, exactly.
If God or a game developer built a universe that was a giant flat disk, you really could sail in a big circle around the center point and end up where you started. It is internally consistent.
It's a totally possible scenario. What is not a possible scenario is a flat Earth that also possesses the exact gravitational properties of a spherical mass. The moment the flat earther introduces a third belief that contradicts the first two, the game engine crashes.
Hodges has another example that I think is painfully relatable. The bad driver. Imagine someone telling you this. Over the last 5 years, I have totaled 3 cars. I've been in 6 minor fender benders. The courts held me legally responsible for most of them. But honestly, I am a thoroughly safe, excellent driver. I've just had an incredible run of bad luck.
We all know someone who talks exactly like this, and our instinct is to say they're delusional. They're deceiving themselves to protect their ego.
But the logician looks at that guy and says, passes the test.
Because there is a mathematically possible, however statistically microscopic universe, where a genuinely safe, brilliant driver just happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time over and over again and gets framed by circumstances.
It's wildly improbable, but it's possible.
Right. The beliefs, I am a safe driver and I have been in 9 accidents, can theoretically be true at the exact same moment.
So if a flat earther and a delusional bad driver are both logically consistent, what actually breaks the machine? Like, what does a true structural contradiction look like?
A contradiction arises when there is absolutely no possible situation in this universe or any imagined sci-fi universe where the beliefs could be true together. Hodges uses the example of a medical researcher who calls a press conference and announces, "I have invented an astonishing new sedative. When you take it, it makes you run faster, think quicker, and feel incredibly excited."
The press corps would just stare at him. Because by the very definition of the words, a sedative is a substance that calms the nervous system down.
The concepts are mutually exclusive. There's no hypothetical reality where a substance that accelerates your nervous system is simultaneously a substance that depresses your nervous system.
Yeah.
That is a hard logical contradiction.
Looking at it from this angle actually makes me feel, I don't know, a bit better about humanity. Because if you define logic purely as avoiding self-contradiction, humans are actually incredibly good at it.
Hodges makes this exact point. We are natural logicians. Nobody wakes up in the morning and deliberately decides to hold 2 completely contradictory beliefs. You cannot genuinely convince yourself that the sky is entirely blue and entirely neon green at the same time. You literally can't force your brain to do it. We are organically wired to believe only what we think is consistent.
So studying a textbook on logic isn't about learning a foreign language. It's more like taking a subconscious instinct we've had since we were toddlers and mapping it out so we can use it deliberately on really complex problems.
That is the goal. But here's the immediate roadblock logicians run into. Logic is the study of beliefs. But beliefs are ghosts. You can't put a belief under a microscope. You can't weigh it on a scale.
They live entirely inside the dark box of the human skull.
Exactly. To study them, we have to look at the exhaust they leave behind. We have to study the medium humans use to transmit those beliefs across the air to another person. We have to study sentences.
And as soon as we rely on human language, the whole enterprise gets incredibly muddy. Human grammar isn't math. It's poetry, it's slang, it's people shouting across crowded rooms. Hodges quotes T.S. Eliot talking about how words strain, crack, and break under the burden of trying to mean things.
Which means a logician cannot just grab any random sentence off the street and shove it into their logical testing machine. They act like bouncers at an exclusive club. They only let a very specific type of sentence through the door, the declarative sentence.
Because not all sentences are trying to state a belief. If I yell, "Shut the door," I'm not stating a fact about the universe, I'm issuing a command. If I ask, "Do you want to get tacos?" I'm issuing an invitation.
Yeah, to filter out the commands and the questions, logicians use a very simple test frame. A declarative sentence is any string of words that can be placed into the blank space of this specific question. Is it true that blank? If the result is a grammatically sound English question, you have a declarative sentence.
Let's run a test on that. If my sentence is, "The price of beef has fallen," I plug it into the frame. Is it true that the price of beef has fallen? It works perfectly. It sounds like a question a news anchor would ask.
But if your sentence was a question to begin with, like, when did you last see your father?
Yeah.
You plug that into the frame, you get, is it true that when did you last see your father?
Which sounds like a robot malfunctioning. It's total nonsense. It fails the test. So logicians toss it out.
The declarative frame is a great filter, but it relies on an assumption that linguists love to argue about. It assumes we all agree on what a grammatical sentence actually is. And Hodges points out that grammar is not a simple yes or no switch. It exists on a spectrum.
It's based entirely on the gut feelings of native speakers. You have sentences at the top of the spectrum that are pristine, like, "These pages must not be removed. No one would ever argue that isn't English." And at the bottom, you have word soup. The very so not was, wasn't it?
But the middle of the spectrum is where logicians get headaches. Hodges identifies a category called perturbations. This is a sentence that is technically broken but so incredibly close to being correct that any native speaker instantly patches the code in their head.
Like someone learning English as a second language asking, "Did you be angry with Sally?" We instantly know they mean, "Were you angry with Sally?" The communication succeeds even though the grammar failed.
And then we drop one rung lower into a category called selection mistakes. This is a fascinating area. A selection mistake happens when the grammar itself is perfectly sound. You have a noun, a verb, an adjective, all in the right order, but the concepts you selected to fill those slots smash into each other in impossible ways.
Oh, Hodges has a fantastic example for this. The pianist then played a red hat topped with geraniums and wisdom.
Right. Structurally, it mimics a perfect sentence, like, the pianist then played a grand piano topped with sheet music and a lamp. But conceptually, you cannot play a hat like an instrument. And a hat cannot be physically topped with an abstract noun like wisdom.
It's absurd. But you know who loves selection mistakes? Writers. Poets. You can't open a book of modern poetry without tripping over a selection mistake.
The legendary linguist Noam Chomsky spent a lot of time analyzing this. He famously coined the phrase, "Colorless green ideas sleep furiously." Every single word selection contradicts the one next to it. Ideas don't sleep. Green cannot be colorless. Sleeping cannot be furious.
So why do poets do it? If it's broken, why use it?
Because by deliberately breaking the literal, logical meaning, the poet forces your brain to stop analyzing the sentence for data and start experiencing the overtones, the emotions, and the rhythm of the words. It's a hack to bypass the logical brain and hit the emotional brain.
But logicians hate the emotional brain. They are trying to run a strict physics engine.
Which is why they treat selection mistakes as unusable. For a logician, a sentence like, "Colorless green ideas sleep furiously," simply fails to state a belief at all. It cannot be tested for consistency because it doesn't assert anything about reality. It gets bounced at the door.
Okay, so let's say the bouncer does his job. We filter out the poems, we fix the perturbations, we drop the questions. We are holding a pristine, perfectly grammatical declarative sentence. Are we finally ready to do some logic?
Not even close. Because even a pristine declarative sentence can house the two greatest enemies of logical clarity, ambiguity, and reference.
Let's tackle ambiguity first, because it feels like half of all internet arguments are just people tripping over ambiguous sentences.
Ambiguity is lethal to logic, because an ambiguous sentence is basically a Trojan horse. It looks like one sentence, but it's actually hiding 2 or 3 entirely different beliefs inside it. If you try to test it for consistency, without knowing which belief is intended, your math will be completely useless.
That makes total sense.
Hodges divides ambiguity into a few main types. The most common is lexical ambiguity.
This is just words having multiple definitions in the dictionary, right? Hodges uses the sentence, "I thought it was rum."
Yeah. Depending on where you are from and what century it is, rum could mean the alcoholic drink made from molasses, or it could be British slang for something queer, strange, or suspicious. If someone says the situation was rum, and you test their belief, assuming they mean the situation was soaked in alcohol, your logical tree is going to grow in the wrong direction.
It reminds me of the old joke about the cobbler who put a sign in his window saying, "Our shoes are guaranteed to give you a fit." Is it a perfect tailored fit or an epileptic medical emergency?
Exactly. The second type is even more insidious structural ambiguity. This happens when every single word has a clear, singular definition, but the way they are physically grouped together creates multiple realities.
Hodges has a brilliant one for this. Bert was a fat stock breeder.
Try to visualize that sentence. Who is Bert? Is Bert a heavily overweight man who breeds standard livestock? Or is Bert a man of average weight who specializes in breeding a specific type of oversized fat stock? The words are exactly the same, but the grouping changes the target.
My favorite subset of this is cross-reference ambiguity. This is where pronouns act like rogue agents. Like, as he uttered the word, he dropped his voice, but she just managed to catch it.
What did she catch? Did she catch the word, meaning she understood what he said? Or did she catch his voice, meaning she noticed his tone changed? The pronoun it is pointing in 2 directions at once.
And this isn't just an exercise in being pedantic. Hodges points out that massive historical arguments have been derailed by ambiguity. People accuse the legendary economist John Maynard Keynes of contradicting himself in his masterwork, The General Theory.
Critics claimed his system was logically inconsistent. But Keynes wasn't being inconsistent, he was just being lexically ambiguous. He used the word save in 2 different ways throughout the book.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes he meant hoarding physical cash, and sometimes he was using a highly technical definition regarding investment ratios. The critics applied the wrong definition to the wrong sentence, manufactured a contradiction that didn't exist, and declared his logic flawed.
You literally have to rewrite the author's sentences to remove the ambiguity before you can fairly judge their logic. You have to force them to be clear.
Sometimes the ambiguity is so dangerous, you have to rewrite a culture's traditions. Hodges brings up a hilarious historical fix regarding a Victorian Easter hymn. Originally, the lyrics were written as, "Jesus lives no longer now, can thy terrors death appall us."
Which is standard triumphant theological poetry. But the structural ambiguity comes down to the pause. If a congregation is singing this, and they take a breath at the end of the musical line, they end up singing, "Jesus lives no longer now."
Which is the exact opposite of the core tenet of the Easter holiday. It transforms the celebration of resurrection into an announcement of a funeral.
That's a disaster.
It was such a structural disaster that the editors of the English hymnal actually had to go in and rewrite the poetry to "Jesus lives, thy terrors now can, O death, no more appall us." They sacrificed the original wording just to close the loophole of structural ambiguity.
So you have to constantly police the structure and the definitions. But once we clear the ambiguity, we run headfirst into the second enemy reference.
This is where language collides with the physical situation it's spoken in. A logician knows that a declarative sentence isn't just universally true or false floating in the void. It is true in certain situations and false in others, depending entirely on the reference.
Because words change their targets based on who is holding the microphone and when they are holding it.
We call these token reflexive words. I, now, here, tomorrow. If a meteorologist goes on television and says, "It is going to rain tomorrow," the literal reference of the word tomorrow shifts every 24 hours. If I say, "I am hungry," the word "I" means something completely different than if you say, "I am hungry."
It's the same with pointing. If I look around a room and say, "This chair is broken," the sentence has zero meaning unless you can physically see the trajectory of my index finger.
The rules of reference are so complicated that human brains take years to map them out. Jean Piaget, the pioneering developmental psychologist, spent a lot of time listening to young children try to explain mechanical concepts. He has this amazing transcript of an 8-year-old child trying to explain the internal workings of a water tap to another child.
The child says something like, "That and that is that, and that because there it is for the water to run through and that you see them inside because the water can't run out."
If you are reading that on a page, it is absolute impenetrable nonsense. It's a storm of pronouns with no anchors. Piaget theorized that young children haven't developed the social awareness of reference yet. They seem to believe that whatever they are pointing at in their own mind is magically, telepathically transmitted into the mind of the listener.
They think the pronoun "that" is universally understood because they understand it. They haven't realized that reference requires a shared physical bridge.
And when that bridge collapses, or when a speaker uses a phrase that is supposed to point to a real object, but the object doesn't actually exist, we get what logicians call referential failure.
Which seems simple enough. If I tell you the house key is inside the blue box next to the telephone, and you walk into the hallway and there is no blue box, my sentence suffered referential failure. The target was an illusion.
But referential failure isn't just about missing boxes. It has been used to prop up some of the most famous, massive philosophical arguments in human history. And Hodges uses St. Anselm of Canterbury as his prime exhibit.
Oh man, the ontological argument. This is an 11th century attempt to use pure, unavoidable logic to prove that God exists. Let's really linger on this and walk through the mechanics because it feels like a magic trick when you first hear it.
It is a masterful piece of linguistic engineering. Anselm starts by inventing a phrase, a concept. He defines God as that than which no greater thing can be conceived.
Basically, try to imagine the ultimate, maximum, most perfect, most powerful thing possible. That concept is the starting line.
Right, and then Anselm sets his trap. He says, okay, suppose an atheist claims that this ultimate concept, that than which no greater thing can be conceived, only exists inside our imaginations. It's just an idea, not a reality.
Sounds reasonable for an atheist to say.
But Anselm replies, if it only exists in our minds, then it lacks reality. And something that exists in reality is objectively greater than something that only exists as a fantasy. Therefore, if our ultimate concept only exists in the mind, we can easily conceive of something even greater than it, namely, that exact same concept, but existing in the real world.
And boom, the trap snaps shut. Because you just conceived of something greater than the thing that was defined as the thing which nothing greater can be conceived. which is a paradox. It's a logical contradiction.
Exactly. Anselm says, since we cannot contradict the definition, our original assumption that it only exists in the mind must be logically false. Therefore, the greatest conceivable thing must exist in reality. God exists by logical necessity.
When you weigh it out like that, it feels airtight. The game engine forces the conclusion. But how does Hodges take a sledgehammer to it using referential failure?
By looking very closely at the grammar of Anselm's second premise, Anselm says, then it is not as great as it would have been if it had existed in reality.
He uses the pronoun it.
Yes. He uses a cross-reference, and a pronoun must refer to something. Anselm is assuming that the phrase that than which no greater thing can be conceived actually successfully refers to a target. He treats it like a valid designator.
But wait, whether or not the target actually exists is the entire thing he is trying to prove in the first place.
Precisely. It is a spectacular circular mechanism. By treating the concept as a valid reference point to attach pronouns to, he smuggles the existence of the object into the premise before the argument even starts. He commits referential failure by assuming the box is by the phone before checking if the box exists. Once you flag the referential failure, the logical proof dissolves into a linguistic parlor trick.
It's like a modern politician or a marketing executive selling a revolutionary new lifestyle algorithm. They use the phrase over and over, attaching pronouns to it, talking about what it will do for you, and your brain just accepts that the algorithm is a real thing when in reality the product doesn't even exist yet. They are using referential assumptions to hack your belief system.
Which is why logicians demand that references be locked down and verified. We have to know exactly what the words are pointing at.
Okay, so let's review our armor. We have stripped out the poetry and the questions, we've rewritten the ambiguities, we've verified the references, we have a solid, airtight declarative sentence. We should be able to hand this to the logician, and they can swing the sword of logic and slice reality cleanly into two piles, true and false.
That is the dream. The poet Gerard Manley Hopkins wrote beautifully about this desire for pure categorization. He wanted everything to be black, white, right, wrong. And the foundational rule of classical logic agrees with him. In any given situation, a declarative sentence has one and only one truth value. It is true or it is false.
It's binary.
Absolute binary. Truth does not have degrees. Hodges points out that true is not what we call a scaling adjective.
A scaling adjective being something like heavy or funny. A boulder is heavy, but a mountain is heavier. A sitcom is funny, but a stand-up comedian might be funnier. It's a slider.
But you cannot say that my statement is truer than your statement. If my statement is truer than yours, it means yours isn't wholly true, therefore it is false. People use the phrase more true in casual conversation, but what they really mean is nearer to the absolute truth. Truth itself is a destination, not a spectrum.
But as soon as we say that, we run into the messy reality of the physical universe again. Truth might be an absolute concept, but the physical world has incredibly fuzzy edges. It's full of borderline cases where the sword of logic simply cannot find a clean place to cut.
Hodges illustrates this beautifully with the story of Ted Bartlett getting fat.
Poor Ted.
Let's look at a timeline. At age 26, Ted Bartlett was thin. The declarative sentence, Ted Bartlett is fat, was absolutely false. 30 years later, at age 56, Ted had gained a massive amount of weight. The sentence, Ted Bartlett is fat, was absolutely true.
The two ends of the timeline are binary.
But human biology is a slow, gradual accumulation of ounces. There was absolutely no precise mathematical cutoff day where Ted suddenly switched from thin to fat.
Right. You can't look at a calendar and say, ah, yes. On Tuesday, March 14th at exactly 2:15 p.m., Ted crossed the fat threshold. It's an absurd concept.
So what happens if a logician looks at Ted when he is 41 years old, right in the middle of his gradual weight gain, and asks, is it true that Ted is fat?
The bouncer at the logical club freezes because the answer isn't true and it isn't false. It's indeterminate.
It is a borderline case. The language we use, words like fat, tall, bald, are inherently fuzzy, and this leads to a very humbling takeaway for logicians. If the words we use have borderline cases, then the concept of consistency itself has borderline cases.
Let's test that. If we have two sentences, Ted Bartlett is not fat and Ted Bartlett weighs exactly 195 pounds.
Depending on Ted's height and muscle mass, it might be completely indeterminate if those two sentences are consistent with each other or if they contradict each other. Where borderlines arise, the gears of the logic machine lock up. It ceases to be an exact science.
It's like reaching the edge of the map in our sci-fi video game analogy. The developers didn't write code for what happens past the mountains, so the graphics just start tearing and glitching. And it gets even worse when we encounter what Hodges calls bizarre situations.
A borderline case is just a fuzzy gradient of a normal word. A bizarre situation is something so entirely new or so strange that human language hasn't evolved the articulation required to handle it at all.
Usually, if I don't know how to use a word, I just ask an expert. If I find a weird bug, I ask an entomologist, is this technically a beetle? And they give me a binary answer.
But in a bizarre situation, there are no experts. No speaker of the language is equipped to say what words are appropriate. Hodges points to the medical phenomenon of the severed corpus callosum.
The split brain patients.
Yes. For patients with severe epilepsy, surgeons will sometimes sever the fibrous bundle connecting the left and right hemispheres of the brain. The physical results are staggering. The left half of the patient's field of vision is processed by the right hemisphere, which controls the left hand. The right half of the vision is processed by the left hemisphere, which controls speech.
So the two halves of the brain are essentially locked in separate soundproof rooms.
Now set up a test. The patient looks straight ahead. You flash a picture of a mouse exclusively to the left side of their vision. The right hemisphere sees it. The patient can use their left hand to draw the mouse or point to a mouse. But if you ask them out loud, what did you see? The left hemisphere, the one with the vocal cords, has no idea. It says, I didn't see anything.
It's deeply unsettling to think about.
Now hand this situation to a logician. Is the following declarative sentence true or false? The patient knows they are seeing a mouse.
How can you answer that? Half of the brain knows, the other half is completely ignorant. It's not true, but it's not false either.
Language fails us. The word knows was invented by humans with whole connected brains to describe the experience of a unified consciousness. It was never designed to be applied to a biologically partitioned consciousness. We can't assign a truth value, not because we are missing data, but because our linguistic tools are simply the wrong shape for the reality we are observing. Logicians have to actively avoid the bizarre if they want their math to work.
Okay, so we stick to the safe zone. Normal human beings, everyday situations, no split brains. But even in the safe zone, humans are incredibly deceptive. We use language to manipulate. How does a strict mathematical system handle statements that are technically true, but engineered to be deeply misleading?
This brings us to a massive fork in the road for modern logicians, the debate between the strong reading and the weak reading of language. Let's look at how people naturally tell stories. Imagine a witness takes the stand at an assault trial and says under oath, Mr. Thumper hit Mr. Thumpman 3 times with a heavy tripod, and Mr. Thumpman fell to the floor.
Very clear declarative sentence. Thumper hit him and he fell.
But the security camera footage shows something different. It shows Mr. Thumpman slipping on a wet floor and falling down completely on his own. Then, while he is lying helplessly on the ground, Mr. Thumper walks into the room, picks up the tripod, and hits him 3 times.
That witness is wildly misleading the jury. They use the word "and" to imply causality, or at least a chronological sequence of events. They painted a picture of a knockdown blow.
Let's look at another classic trap. A man comes home from an office Christmas party. His wife asks if he behaved himself. He admits, I did kiss some of the girls at the party.
When in reality, what did he actually do?
He kissed all 19 of the girls at the party.
Oh, wow. Okay. Or let's flip it around. A guy goes to a bar and boasts to his friends, all the girls at the party kissed me. But he conveniently leaves out the fact that there were 0 girls at the party. It was just him and his buddies.
So we have 3 statements: the tripod, the 19 kisses, and the empty party. The philosophical question is, are these statements logically false or just socially misleading?
My instinct says they are lies. They are false.
That instinct is what we call the strong reading. Advocates for the strong reading argue that human language carries baked-in assumptions. When we say A and B, the strong reading assumes A happened and then B happened. When we say some, the strong reading assumes some, but not all. When we say all, it assumes at least one exists. Because these speakers violated the natural human assumptions of the words, their statements are logically false.
It feels morally right to call them false. They lied by omission. But what is the alternative?
The alternative is the weak reading. And on the weak reading, all 3 of those statements are technically 100% true.
How? How can kissing 19 people be true when you said you kissed some?
Because the weak reading strips away all social niceties, implications, and chronological assumptions. It treats words like raw mathematical operators. The word "and" simply links 2 facts together like a plus sign. It does not dictate time. Thumper hit him is a fact. Thupman fell is a fact. The statement linked by and is mathematically true.
What about the kisses?
Mathematically, a set of some is fully compatible with a set of all. If you have a basket of 19 apples and you eat all of them, it is factually true to say you ate some of them. You didn't tell the whole truth, but the fragment you offered does not contradict reality.
It's the logic of a defense attorney looking for a technicality. But which reading does formal logic actually use?
Modern formal logic almost universally adopts the weak reading.
I hate that. It feels like it rewards manipulation.
Logicians are not moralists, they are structural engineers. The weak reading is adopted because it is infinitely easier to describe mathematically. Trying to write an equation that accounts for what a reasonable person would assume based on social context is impossible. By treating and strictly as a non-chronological plus sign, the math becomes perfectly stable. If a man says, I kissed some of the girls, in fact I kissed all of them, the strong reading says he's contradicting himself. The weak reading says he is just adding data to his first premise. His beliefs are perfectly technically consistent.
Okay, I have to accept that logic is a cold, calculating machine. We have our clean, weak reading, unambiguous, declarative sentences. We know what logic is. Now, how does this cold machine actually test a building to see if it stands up? How do we test an argument?
We need to define what a valid argument actually is in this system. An argument is basically a journey. You start with a set of premises, the reasons or data you are providing, and you take a step to arrive at a conclusion.
Right. Premise A plus premise B equals conclusion C.
An argument is deemed valid if, and only if, there is absolutely no possible situation in which its premises are all true, but its conclusion is false. If the premises are true, the conclusion is forcefully dragged into being true alongside them.
I want to highlight something really important there. You did not say that the premises have to be true in the real world.
Exactly the opposite. You can construct a perfectly valid argument using completely insane false premises. For example, premise 1, all birds are made of liquid metal. Premise 2, a pigeon is a bird. Conclusion, a pigeon is made of liquid metal.
In the real world, birds are not terminators. The premise is false, but the structure of the argument is flawless. If premise 1 and 2 are true, the conclusion must be true. The argument is valid.
Logic tests the plumbing, not the water you pour through it. So, how do we test the plumbing? How do we prove there is no possible situation where the premises are true and the conclusion is false?
This feels like trying to prove a negative. How can you test every possible situation in the universe?
You don't.
Uh-huh.
You use a magnificent mathematical judo move called reductio ad absurdum, reduction to an absurdity. To prove an argument is valid, you start by taking all of your premises, and then you deliberately assume that your conclusion is false. You group them together into what we call a counterexample set.
So if I want to prove that it is raining outside, I start my logical test by forcefully stating it is not raining outside. I assume the exact opposite of what I'm trying to prove.
Yes, you build a hypothetical universe where your premises are true and your conclusion failed. And then you run the physics engine. If that assumption forces your universe into a logical absurdity, a direct contradiction, then you know your assumption was fatally flawed. The counterexample universe cannot exist. Therefore, there is no possible situation where the premises are true and the conclusion is false. Your original argument is proven valid.
It's brilliant, but people absolutely hate this method in casual debate. It feels so counterintuitive to start a serious argument by aggressively assuming a false conclusion. Hodges brings up this deeply tragic, hilarious story about James Smith, a 19th century mathematician who just could not grasp this concept.
James Smith is a legend for all the wrong reasons. He became completely obsessed with the mathematical value of pi. He convinced himself, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that pi was exactly 25 divided by 8. Which is 3.125.
Which we know is wrong. Pi is an irrational number. It goes on forever. 3.14159, and so on.
But Smith wanted to prove his theory using reductio ad absurdum. He published papers where he essentially said, let us assume that pi is exactly 258. And then he ran his own math. And, shocker, he personally failed to find a contradiction in his own work.
He thought that just because he made the assumption, he had won.
He fundamentally misunderstood the tool. Assuming the premise is just loading the gun, you still have to fire it to see if it explodes. When actual competent mathematicians took his assumption that pi was 258 and ran it through basic geometry, they instantly generated massive contradictions. Circles stopped closing. The mat exploded.
And how did Smith react when they showed him the contradictions?
He just called them incompetent and accused them of not understanding his genius. He couldn't accept that the absurdity they found proved his initial assumption was invalid.
It's hard to visualize reductio ad absurdum as an abstract concept, but in the 1930s, a German mathematician named Gerhard Gentzen gave us a way to actually draw it on a piece of paper. He invented the semantic tableau technique.
The semantic tableau is one of the most elegant tools in logic. It translates abstract truth-seeking into a visual, branching diagram. Imagine drawing an upside-down tree.
Okay, I'm picturing a single dot at the top of a page and lines branching downwards.
You start at the top node by writing down your counterexample set. You write your premises and the exact opposite of your conclusion. This is your seed. From there, you use strict grammatical rules to break those complex sentences down into simpler atomic sentences, building branches downwards as you go.
It's a map of possibilities.
Yes, every single branch extending downward is an attempt to describe a possible situation where your starting set is true. If a sentence says A and B are both true, you don't need to branch. You just draw a straight line down and write A and then beneath it B. They must exist together in the same reality.
But what if the sentence has the word or? Like either the battery is dead or the starter is broken.
Then reality diverges. You have to split your tree. You draw two diagonal lines branching off. One branch explores the universe where the battery is dead. The other branch explores the universe where the starter is broken.
Let's walk through a tangible example of this because drawing the tree changes everything. Let's use the chemical analysis example from the text. We have a chemist testing a solution for metals.
Perfect. Here is the chemist's argument. Premise 1. If cobalt is present, A and D nickel is absent, then a brown color appears. Premise 2. A brown color does not appear. Premise 3, nickel is absent. From this data, the chemists draw the conclusion cobalt is absent.
Okay, we want to prove if that argument is structurally valid. So we build the tableau tree. We start at the top with our counterexample set. We write down premise 1, 2, and 3 exactly as they are. But for the conclusion, we negate it. We assume the conclusion is false. We write cobalt is present.
Now we have our seed. We look at premise 1. If cobalt is present and the nickel is absent, then a brown color appears. This is an if-then statement, which creates branching possibilities. If we follow the rules of breaking this down, one branch explores the condition failing and the other explores the consequence happening.
So we draw a branch down. On this branch, we write the consequence, a brown color appears. But wait, if we look further up the trunk of the tree, at premise 2, we already established as a hard fact that a brown color does not appear.
And right there, on the page, the physics engine crashes. We have a universe asserting that a color appears and does not appear simultaneously. It is a direct contradiction.
It's an absurdity. So what do we do to the branch?
We close it.
Yeah.
You literally draw a horizontal line under that branch to signify it is a dead end. It is a failed attempt to describe a reality.
And as you keep breaking down the chemist's sentences, branching left and right for every possibility, you keep hitting contradictions. Nickel is present, clashes with nickel is absent. Cobalt is absent, clashes with our assumption that cobalt is present.
And here is the magic of the tableau. If you continue this process, and every single branch of the finished tree ends in a contradiction, if every single branch is closed with a line, what does that mean?
It means every single attempt to describe a universe where the premises are true and the conclusion is false has exploded. The counterexample set is impossible. Therefore, the chemist's original argument is 100% valid.
Exactly. You have visibly, mechanically proven truth. But if even one single branch stays open, snaking all the way down the page without contradicting itself,
Then you have found a counterexample. You have drawn a map to a possible situation where the premises are true and the conclusion is a lie. The argument is invalid. The plumbing leaks.
the tableau technique is incredible, but to use it, to draw those branches correctly, you have to know exactly how to break complex English sentences apart. You can't just hack at them with a machete. You need a scalpel. You need to uncover the phrase markers.
Phrase markers. This feels like going back to middle school grammar class, diagramming sentences on the chalkboard.
It is essentially that, but with much higher stakes. Phrase markers are smaller upside-down trees that label the internal constituents of a single sentence. You identify the noun phrase, the verb phrase, and break those down into the specific nouns, adjectives, and verbs.
Why is this so crucial for logic? Why can't we just read the sentence left to right?
Because of our old enemy structural ambiguity, how we group the words together changes the literal truth of the sentence, which changes how the tableau branches. Think back to the sentence, "The wild animal keeper mopped his brow."
Right. If we try to plug that into a logic tree without a phrase marker, we don't know the scope of the word wild.
If the phrase marker groups wild and animal into one subnode, the man is a keeper of wild animals. He could be a very calm, boring man, But if the phrase marker groups animal and keeper into a node and applies wild to the whole thing, he is a wild keeper of standard animals. He's a maniac with a mop. The scope alters reality.
Hodges has another example that shows how scope changes the actual requirements of a statement. The man must be rich or young and good-looking. Let's draw the phrase marker for that.
If we place our primary branching split at the word or, we get two distinct nodes. Node A is simply rich. Node B is young and good-looking.
Which means if a man fulfills node A, he passes the test. An 80-year-old, hideously ugly billionaire qualifies.
But if we shift the phrase marker and place the primary split at the word and, node A becomes rich or young, node B becomes good-looking.
In that structure, node B is mandatory. The man can be rich or he can be young, but regardless of which one he is, he must be good-looking. The ugly billionaire is rejected. The deep structure of the grammar defines the logical outcome.
And uncovering that deep structure owes a massive debt to Noam Chomsky's theory of transformational syntax. Chomsky argued that the surface structure of a sentence, the literal order of the words on the page, is often a disguise. Words get moved around or squat in the middle of other concepts for the sake of conversational flow.
Hodges gives the example. Bob seized it and brought it up.
Read that literally, left to right. The word it is sitting right in the middle of the phrase broke up. If you mechanically split the sentence there, you get garbage.
But intuitively, we know that broke up is the real unified verb phrase.
Chomsky's syntax allows us to transform the surface structure back into its logical deep structure. The true underlying sentence is, Bob seized it and he broke up it. Once we expose that deep structure via phrase markers, we can safely and cleanly snap the sentence apart to build our Tableau trees.
I'm going to be honest, dealing with all of this, the English grammar, the hidden scopes, the squatting pronouns, the phrase markers, is exhausting. It is so much linguistic baggage to carry around just to test an argument. Doesn't logic have a shortcut?
It does. When logicians get tired of wrestling with English, they simply banish it. They strip away the vocabulary entirely and replace it with pure math. They enter the realm of propositional calculus and truth functors.
This is where we trade the alphabet for symbols. We replace the messy, ambiguous word "and" with a clean mathematical operator.
We use what are called sentence functors. Picture a rigid metal frame with empty holes in it. You plug whole sentences into the holes. But specifically, logicians use truth functors. A truth functor is a frame with an absolutely predictable truth table. Its output, whether the whole frame is true or false, depends only on the truth values of the sentences you plug into it. It doesn't care about the poetry, or the context, or the emotion. It only calculates the inputs.
Hodges outlines the 5 basic truth functors. These are essentially the foundational blocks of all logical calculus. Let's not just list them, let's discover how they work. The first one is the simplest negation.
Negation is the equivalent of a mirror. In English, it is not true that.
Right.
Replace it with a simple symbol, often a tilde or a little hook. If the sentence you plug into the hole is true, the negation functor outputs false. If you plug in false, it outputs true. It simply flips the binary.
Second is conjunction. In English, this is and. We use a symbol that looks like an upside-down V. How does its truth table work?
For a conjunction frame to output true, both of the sentences plugged into its holes must be true. If A is true but B is false, the whole machine outputs false. It demands absolute cooperation.
Third is disjunction, the English word or, usually symbolized by a V shape. Now, this one is tricky because of human habits. If I go to a restaurant and the menu says, entree comes with soup or salad, I know that if I demand both the soup and the salad, the waiter will charge me extra. It's an exclusive or, one or the other, not both.
But remember, logic uses the weak reading of language.
Yeah.
The disjunction truth functor represents the inclusive or. The frame outputs true if A is true, if B is true, and D if both A and B are true. The only way a disjunction fails and outputs false is if both inputs are dead false.
Fourth is material implication, the arrow. In English, it's the if-then structure, if A, then B.
The arrow is fascinating because it is highly forgiving. There is only one specific scenario where an if A, then B frame outputs false. That is when the cause A is true, but the promised effect B is false. If it rains A, the street must be wet. B. If it rains and the street remains dry, the arrow is broken. Output false. In all other combinations, the arrow assumes truth.
And the fifth is the biconditional. If and only if, sometimes drawn as a double-headed arrow.
This is the ultimate symbol of equivalence. The biconditional only outputs true when both inputs share the exact same truth value. Either both are true or both are false. If there's a mismatch, the machine outputs false.
So we have our 5 symbols. We can just take an English paragraph, cross out the words, draw the symbols, and do the math.
If only it were that easy. Translating English into propositional calculus is filled with hidden traps. You cannot blindly swap words for symbols because English words often carry structural weight that the symbols destroy.
Give me an example of a translation trap.
Take the sentence, New York and Cairo are over 1,000 miles apart.
It has the word "and" right in the middle, so I grab my upside-down V symbol for conjunction, and I split it. New York is 1,000 miles apart, and Cairo is 1,000 miles apart.
Which is complete gibberish. A single city cannot be 1,000 miles apart from itself. The word "and" in that English sentence was not acting as a truth functor linking two separate beliefs. It was acting as a relational bridge between the two subjects. If you blindly apply the math, you generate nonsense.
Or what about restrictive phrases? Hodges uses this sentence, "The clever twin was always teasing her dim-witted sister."
If you try to split that using a conjunction, you get the twin was clever and the twin was always teasing her sister.
That seems okay on the surface.
But you've lost the deep structure. In the original sentence, the word clever is restrictive. It identifies which specific twin is doing the teasing. By splitting it apart, you've just created a generic statement about a twin who happens to be clever. You haven't preserved the precise target of belief. You have to be incredibly meticulous to preserve the deep structure when translating to symbols.
But once you navigate those traps and you get your argument purely into those 5 symbols, the math is incredibly powerful. And it leads to what might be the most mind-bending revelation in the book, The Functional Completeness Theorem.
Yes. This is a mathematical proof that essentially closes the book on logical relationships. It proves that our 5 basic truth functors, negation, conjunction, disjunction, arrow, and biconditional, are all we will ever need.
Meaning, if a mad scientist locked themselves in a lab for a decade, trying to invent a brand new, wildly complex logical relationship, a new way for thoughts to connect that humanity has never seen before, they would fail.
They would absolutely fail to create anything fundamentally new. The theorem proves that any possible logical relationship, no matter how convoluted, can be mathematically boiled down and expressed as a combination of just those 5 basic symbols.
It's like finding the periodic table of elements for human thought. Everything is just combinations of these atomic building blocks. In fact, Hodges points out you can boil it down even further. You don't even need all 5. You can express the entire universe of logic using just 2 symbols, not and. Every other relationship can be simulated by combining those 2. It's staggering.
It is an elegant, closed system. But as powerful as propositional calculus is, we aren't at the absolute bottom yet. We've broken paragraphs into sentences. We've broken sentences into math. Now we must look at the very atoms of the language itself.
We have to split the atom. We have to look inside the simplest, most basic sentences to the actual objects we are talking about and how they relate.
We do this by slicing these atomic sentences into 2 distinct parts, designators and predicates.
Designators are the pointing fingers. They are the words that target a specific object or group in the universe. Proper names like Abraham Lincoln, non-count nouns like copper sulfate, or abstract concepts like poverty, pronouns, and definite descriptions like the largest marrow of the season.
And predicates are what is left over. They are the structural matrices remaining when you scoop the designators out of the sentence. So if your sentence is John loves Mary, John and Mary are your designators. When you remove them, you are left with the predicate frame blank loves blank, or mathematically, X loves Y.
But even at this microscopic atomic level, we can't escape the messiness of context, because a designator might not always point to its primary everyday reference.
Exactly. We have to be vigilant about distinguishing between purely referential occurrences and context shifts. Think back to a historian writing a book. They write a sentence, the Queen had in 1840 married Prince Albert.
If we isolate the designator, the Queen, and look at its primary reference in the modern era, it points to Elizabeth II. But Elizabeth II didn't marry Prince Albert in 1840. The sentence would be false.
But the sentence isn't false, because the historian has instituted a temporal context shift. By placing the date 1840 in the sentence, they have shifted the pointing finger of the designator away from the primary reference backwards in time to point at Queen Victoria.
If a logician doesn't recognize that temporal context shift, the atomic structure of their logic breaks down. But if we ensure that a designator is acting purely referentially, if we know exactly what it's pointing at, we unlock the right to use one of the most powerful rules in the history of logic identity, and Leibniz's law.
Leibniz's law is the bedrock of mathematical substitution. It states a very simple premise. If object B is identical to object C, then anything that is true of B is also true of C.
It sounds so intuitive, it's almost boring. If Mr. Helly is the treasurer, and we know that Mr. Helly lost the petty cash box, then we can absolutely substitute the designators and say the treasurer lost the petty cash box. You can swap identical parts without changing the truth value of the engine.
But you have to be incredibly careful because human minds do not operate like mathematical equations. Hodges brings up a brilliant, famous example of where Leibniz's law seems to spontaneously combust, known as the fallacy of education.
Oh, I love this one. Let's walk through it. We have a guy named Hamish. Premise 1, Hamish can name his own brother, which is true. Everyone knows their sibling's name. Premise 2, his brother is the man standing far away in the distance.
And if we apply Leibniz's law, we see that his brother is identical to the man in the distance. So we substitute the designators. We arrive at the conclusion Hamish can name the man in the distance.
But if you've ever stood in a foggy field and tried to recognize someone a mile away, you know that conclusion is totally false. Hamish looks at the blurry figure in the distance and says, I have no idea who that is. He cannot name him.
So why did the flawless math of Leibniz's law fail? The brother is the man in the distance.
Because it hit a human brain.
Exactly. It fails because the phrase Hamish can name creates what logicians call an intentional context. It involves human knowledge, perception, and recognition. The phrase the man in the distance is not acting purely referentially here. It is tangled up in Hamish's limited sensory inputs.
Right.
You cannot blindly apply mathematical substitution to the inner workings of human belief. Just because B equals C in reality doesn't mean Hamish knows B equals C.
Leibniz's law breaks against human ignorance, and it breaks against time, too. Hodges mentions looking at a photograph of himself as a newborn baby.
Let's run the law. Hodges is identical to the baby in the photo. The baby in the photo is completely beardless. Therefore, Hodges is completely beardless.
But the adult Wilfred Hodges writing the book has a massive beard.
Another temporal context shift. The baby is only identical to the past version of Hodges, not the present. Leibniz's law requires us to keep our tenses perfectly straight and our context purely referential. If we allow time or human perception to muddy the waters, the atom splits incorrectly and the logic explodes.
Wow, okay, what a journey this has been. We started with the raw, chaotic reality of flat earthers and bad drivers. We learned to isolate declarative sentences, to act like bouncers filtering out the questions in the poetry. We stripped away the Trojan horses of lexical and structural ambiguity.
We debated the morality of kissing 19 girls and adopted the unemotional weak reading of truth.
Yes, we built sprawling mathematical trees using semantic tableau, chased down the deep syntax of phrase markers, translated English into the periodic table of propositional calculus, and finally we split the atom of language down to designators and predicates, watching them bend under the weight of time and human perception.
It is a breathtaking architecture. Logicians have built an incredible, intricate cathedral of rules to try and capture truth and test reality. But building this cathedral requires something profound from the logicians themselves. It requires what Hodges calls a self-denying ordinance.
Right. The first assumption. To make all this math work, to use Leibniz's law, to build the branches of the semantic tableau, logicians literally have to pass a rule by decree. They have to universally assume that the things they are talking about actually exist.
They have to artificially banish referential failure from their system. Because if they allow ghosts into the machine, if the present king of France doesn't exist, but someone uses it as a designator, the entire logical machinery grinds to a halt. Equations can't calculate a void. Logic requires a sanitized, perfectly static universe where every word has a locked target and meanings never, ever shift.
But looking at that strict requirement raises such a profound, provocative thought about the human experience. Logic demands that we only talk about things that exist. But isn't human existence practically defined by referential failure?
How do you mean?
Well, we spend our entire lives talking passionately about things that do not physically exist. We talk about the future, which isn't here yet and has no physical reference point. We talk about people we've lost who are gone. We talk about abstract hopes, uninvented technologies, dreams, and fictions. Our greatest speeches and our most comforting conversations are completely riddled with referential failure.
That is undeniably true. The things that drive us most deeply often have no physical coordinates.
Logic needs a sterile, static universe to function. It needs a physics engine without glitches. But perhaps the poetry, the selection mistakes, the ambiguities, and the referential failures, perhaps those are the very things that make human language actually worth speaking. The messiness of language isn't a bug. It's the feature that allows us to imagine a world that isn't here yet. It's how we dream.
That is a beautiful way to synthesize it.
Mm.
Logic gives us the absolute best tools to dissect our arguments, to ensure we are being consistent, and to protect ourselves from being manipulated. But it is only one lens through which to view the majesty of language. I encourage everyone listening, the next time you hear a politician give a speech or a news report, or even just when you're having an argument with a friend at a dinner party, try to look for the deep structures.
Yeah.
Look for the structural ambiguities. Test the consistency of their tableau.
Apply the X-ray machine. Map the logic. But just remember, while the X-ray can show you the clean, jagged white line of a broken argument, it takes the poetry, the context, and the muddy waters of human empathy to actually understand how to heal it.
Wonderfully said.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.